We are immediately introduced to Mr. Crown, played by Pierce Brosnan. We are also instantly made aware that he is a very wealthy man. Then we are introduced to a group of non-American men who spoke Romanian with what looked like an airtight plan to steal artworks from a museum. However, it quickly becomes obvious that these non-American men were a mere diversion, a decoy, part of a bigger plan by Mr. Crown, who used their failed attempt to steal from the museum as a chance to, himself, successfully steal a pricey artwork from the same museum. My point is that, could our men have been intentionally indoctrinated with these revolutionary ideas by the West for a bigger agenda of freeing up a disoriented and traumatized Africa for their further exploitation? I don't think anyone has ever really looked into this possibility from this angle. We all see how the exploitation of Africa by the West continues, and multiple people talk about these exploitations. But no one really looks at the operations that led and continue to lead to these exploitations. It will be nice to follow the developmental path of the men that plotted the January 15, 1966 coup from when they were not so revolutionary to when they became so revolutionary, and the factors, especially the foreign factors, that influenced their decision to forcefully remove a sitting civilian government, no matter how corrupt. I hope these analyses are seen as an invitation to other intellectual Nigerians to engage in a rich discussion on the events that took place in the First Republic of Nigeria, which we all continue to pay the price for till today. Constructive counter-arguments are more than welcome. So with all these multiple factors at play, the creeping socialist and communist ideologies, the wars all over Europe and Asia, which our men were actively participating in, the talk of a military intervention and revolution in Nigeria seemed certain. According to Ademoyega, throughout 1965, Nzogu openly and freely talked about his intention to stage a revolution to young Nigerian officers. Sun Tzu would have told Nzogu to let his plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when he moves, fall like a thunderbolt. That openly having a conversation as serious as removing a sitting civilian government only informed all parties opposed to that idea what you were doing, and these parties taking countermeasures to make sure you don't succeed in your agenda. Their preparations were not as airtight as author seems to express in the book. For instance, by Ademoyega's admission, Donatus Okafor and Ifeanyi's pledge of support and provision of troops could not be verified or tested effectively. Yet it was included in their plans for the January 15, 1966 coup. A good number of the officers who participated in the coup were inexperienced. The coup plotters were not of the same mind. Sun Tzu would have said to the January 15, 1966 coup plotters that one of the 5 essentials for victory is: he will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. But this was far from it. The people involved in the plotting of this coup did not all have the same mind. Some were hesitant, and during the execution of the coup, some outrightly abandoned their roles in the coup The coup plan, according to Ademoyega's book, Why We Struck, was full of multiple acts that would pass as sabotage. And why Biafra went on to incorporate Ifejuna in its military affairs beats me, because Ifejuna seemed to have a reputation and conducted himself multiple times in a manner that clearly showed he could not be trusted. He seemed quite treacherous. Ironsi was among those that were targeted for the January 15, 1966 coup. However, when you read the circumstances surrounding the failed attempt to delete Aguiyi Ironsi, you cannot help but strongly suspect that Ironsi was briefed by one of the coup plotters, its saboteur. You would have to read the book where the attempt to delete Ironsi failed. Yet, I would say that as poorly prepared as Sun Tzu's military classic book, The Art of War, would judge the January 15, 1966 coup to be, of all the other subsequent military coups that took place, it was the most organized, and I think it is because of the close proximity the officers who plotted the January 15, 1966 coup had to Europe and their many wars. Contrary to the way the January 15, 1966 coup has been talked about and sometimes taught to be targeted towards an ethnic group, Ademoyega insisted that it was not targeted towards any ethnic group but was honorable. They say even the devil does not know the intention of men. But I must say that I find Ademoyega's statement that the January 15, 1966 coup was not targeted at any ethnic group believable. The author was full of criticism of Aguiyi Ironsi's regime and its propaganda against the coup plotters. This is yet one of many things that this book clarifies for me, because before reading this book, I, like many other Nigerians as well, thought that Ironsi was part of the group that planned the January 15, 1966 coup, given that he emerged the military leader Nigeria had after that coup. But he wasn't. In fact, he was one of the people they intended to delete in the January 15, 1966 coup. Long story short, the so-called well-planned January 15, 1966 coup failed. I really don't want to give much away, but as mentioned earlier, their preparation was not as airtight as they thought. Even Nzogu's conditions for a peaceful handover was not very smart. Despite knowing the people he was negotiating with were people he deemed corrupt and would have deleted if his coup was successful, he somehow trusted that they would honor his terms. For Nzogu to do this, he did not fully know the people he was negotiating with, and he did not fully understand the seriousness and implications of his failed coup. Sun Tzu would have said to Nzogu, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle." Sun Tzu would have also said that clearly Nzogu did not know the people he had declared war against for their corruption, and he also did not know himself, and that is why the January 15, 1966 coup failed, and subsequent negotiations also failed. Sun Tzu would have further told Nzogu that the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in the temple where the battle is fought. The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations lead to victory, and few calculations to defeat. How much more no calculation at all? It is by attention to this point that one can foresee who is likely to win or lose. Sun Tzu would have said that Nzogu's calculations, as written by Ademoyega in the book, were not enough and too defective to secure him a victory because he knew neither the people he was up against, and it seems neither himself. Ademoyega wrote that the revolutionaries, apparently what he called those who plotted and agreed with the plotters of the January 15, 1966 coup, were ready to lose 1 million men to ensure the success of their coup. Then he goes on to quote Russia's sacrifice of 2 million and Chinese several millions in their revolution. Ironically, later on in the book, the author would criticize Ojukwu for making a similar suicidal comment. You clearly see the influence of communist regimes on the minds of a lot of our military men in the First Republic of Nigeria. This one military coup event spiraled out of control and led Nigeria down the bloody path of military coups, ethnic cleansing, and the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Nigerian Biafran War. This one military event also caused the traumatization and devastation of Nigerians and Nigerian infrastructure. This is why it was not good for the coup plotters to resort to violence. Sun Tzu would have said to them, "To fight and conquer in all your battles is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." Sun Tzu would have told them that despite the British-designed marginalization most southern Nigerians and non-Fulani northern Nigerians felt, they still had enough respect from these corrupt officials and foreign interests to start a negotiation that would have resulted in the peaceful correction of the corruption in the country. Avoiding violence, or at least violence in your home country, is something the clever European Mill discovered a long time ago. So much so that when the smartest European mills do resort to violence, they make sure it is far from their home because they are well aware of their extremely violent, feudal, adversarial, and warring past, and how it held them bondage for such a long time until the Renaissance period, where their intellectuals stepped in and rescued European men from self-extermination, self-annihilation. Our violent past pales in comparison to that of the European. While ours deals with fighting off invaders and conquerors for the most part, European war history not only deals with that, but largely deals with their brother and sister nations warring against themselves. A good modern example is the Russian-Ukraine war. The author credits two factors as why the coup failed. 1. The fickle-mindedness of some of those who planned the coup. 2. Ifajuna's behavior. I wouldn't call it fickle-mindedness, but rather not knowing when someone shared the same revolutionary ideas as you. Sun Tzu would have responded to Ademoyega's claim that the fickle-mindedness of some of those who planned the coup contributed to the failure of the coup in this manner. that one of the 5 essentials for victory is he will win, whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. Sun Tzu would have further responded that the so-called fickle-minded plotters ought to have been cut off from the coup plot. Plus, authors should have outrightly called out Ifeanyi's behavior as a sabotage that dealt a costly blow to the success of the coup. Read the book. I think it can be clearly seen why the emergence of Aguiyi Ironsi as the military leader after the failed January 15, 1966 coup, coupled with his policies, which author wrote seemed to favor Igbos and Easterners, would have inevitably led to more anti-Igbo sentiments. Read the book and then join me in more conversations. I find Ademoyega's criticism of Ironsi convincing. Author wrote Ironsi did nothing to cool down the tension that was in the country, despite seeing the coming storm. Author wrote Ironsi was copying Lugard's failed system of running Nigeria as a unit in consultation with the traditional rulers, a system that author wrote failed in 1946. But Ironsi wouldn't have known this because he was fighting in Burma that year. Do you see how deeply involved our men were in all these foreign wars? There were so many wars, I can't even keep up. Author also wrote that Ironsi did not care to distinguish between the revolutionary coup plotters of January 15, 1966 and his regime, and the British and other tribalistic Nigerians used that chance to propagate the January 15, 1966 coup and Ironsi regime as an Igbo domination agenda. But in the written words of Ademoyega, a credible Yoruba man, the January 15, 1966 coup was not an Igbo coup, and I believe him. Very interesting things he wrote about Ironsi. It appears that Ironsi was somewhat of a weirdo too. Author wrote he slept every night in a gunboat of the Navy on the lagoon. Yes, Ironsi passed his nights at sea, literally. Ironsi was also known for the crocodile sculpture he carried around with him. More intriguing is the fact that his name, Aguiyi, is the Igbo word for crocodile, and lagoons are one of the known habitats of crocodiles. In the occultic world, crocodiles play a very significant role. Conversation for another day. Speaking of the occult, I might as well mention Ademoyega's rant on male cults. I don't know how much I can read word for word of what he wrote on male cults without violating his copyrights. It's almost a whole page, but I'll read some of it so that I can give you an idea. Ademoyega wrote, another factor responsible for social injustice was the existence of secret cults. These cults helped their members to exploit the remainder of the society in many ways, such as making sure that they always won in law courts, that they always got the few available contracts, and that they always got all available privileges of the society. In ages past, when our forefathers worshipped idols and trees and stones and animals, they had need to make secret sacrifices. They knew that such deeds were repugnant to the tender hearts of women. Therefore, they did most of these sordid things in the night and under the cover of darkness. Also, they had banned women from coming out on such nights when they did those horrible and detestable things. They also forbade women from entering into groves where signs of their misdeeds remained visible, say in the form of newly deskinned human skulls. The cults contributed in no small way to the ineffectiveness of the rule of law, corruption of officials, and the enthronement of nepotism, mediocrity, avarice, greed, and burglary as the rulers of society. These cults are known to practice human sacrifice and other repugnant anti-social rituals. I'm going to stop there. What caught my attention with regards to Igbos in the military in the First Republic of Nigeria was that even though overall the majority of men in the military were Northerners, thanks to Britain's manipulation, according to Ademoyega, Igbos dominated the upper hierarchy of the army as at January 1966. He even gave percentages: 60% in January 1966 and 73% in March 1966 of the upper hierarchy of the Nigerian army were Igbos. Fast forward to present-day Nigeria, where Igbo's presence is almost non-existent in the upper hierarchy of the Nigerian army. On the subject of secession, based on what I read in the book, before Igbos clamor for secession, northern Nigerians were threatening to secede from Nigeria. Guess who was the head of this rebel northern army that wanted nothing short of secession from Nigeria? Yakubu Gowon. But here comes the British again. According to Ademoyega, the British were the first to read tribalism into the January 15, 1966 coup, spreading anti-Igbo propaganda all over Nigeria. So here comes the British again, along with the Americans and the Nigerians who benefited from a dysfunctional Nigeria, telling the northern secessionists that if they seceded, they would suffer because they were landlocked and the wealth of Nigeria came from the south. Most Igbos don't know this, but Igbos were the original Nigerian nationalists, while Northerners were the secessionists. How then did they swap positions, with Igbos becoming secessionists and Northerners nationalists? According to Ademoyega, two factors caused this. 1. Northern violence on Igbos, and 2. The Ojukwu Gowon conflict. The pogrom on Igbos in the north made Biafra fated. Ademoyega wrote that Northerners were now asking for one Nigeria, while at the same time deleting and destroying the property of other Nigerians. I personally suspect that those northern attacks might in fact have been foreign Afro-Asiatic mercenaries brought into Nigeria from other parts of Africa, the islands, and other parts of the world to come and exact mayhem on other Nigerians. And because northern Nigerians are themselves predominantly Afro-Asiatic, it was difficult for other Nigerians to distinguish between northern Nigerians and these foreign Afro-Asiatic aggressors who were most likely brought to Nigeria by foreign elements and corrupt Nigerian politicians protecting their foreign interests in Nigeria, regardless of the costs to Nigerians. I'm sure the term Afro-Asiatic is new to a lot of Nigerians. That's why you should subscribe to my channel, because to really understand the Nigerian situation, you have to go to the history of the peopling of present-day Nigeria. long before British colonialism. The conflict between Ojukwu and Gowon continued to brew. Negotiations between them failed, and then a mutual friend, General Ankara of Ghana, offered to host both parties in a meeting at Aburi, Ghana. Of course, here comes Britain making sure it was part of this negotiation by making sure it happened. An agreement was reached at Aburi where all Ojukwu's proposals, among which was to stop the use of violence to settle national crisis, were unanimously adopted. Unfortunately, as soon as Gowon returned to Nigeria, he did not honor the Aburi Accord and sought to amend it, which Ojukwu rejected. Still on the Ojukwu-Gowon conflict, Ojukwu insisted that Gowon was not the most senior military person to lead, or should I say, rule Nigeria. Ademoyega wrote that while Ojukwu was right on Gowon, the fact is a military coup was what placed Gowon in authority, and Ojukwu ought to have taken swift action against the counter-coup that placed Gowon in power. If Ademoyega's idea of swift action is to violently plot a counter-coup to this counter-coup, to that I say, foul. No more blood shed. That would have given the British, America, and other foreign interests more reason to spread their usual anti-Igbo sentiments, which were already so bad in Nigeria, even in the East among the non-Igbo Easterners, due to the unfortunate success of this British propaganda against Igbos. I am so glad Ojukwu never conducted a counter-coup to remove Gowon. I am so glad that never happened. I would also have been happier if the Biafran War was averted, because though Eastern region bore the major loss, Nigerians as well suffered as a result of the Biafran War. We want peace, right? The dignity of all Nigerians regardless of ethnic origin, right? And an end to tribalism.